Hello and welcome to this episode of the Artist Collective radio show. I'm your host, Shoshana Pearson. Today on my show, I have one of my oldest friends. Jay Allen is the founder and director of Secret Powers, an animation and special effects studio out in Fort Worth. He is also the mastermind behind the viral videos produced by his alter ego called SLACKCiRCUS. The fabulous Secret Powers has seen thousands and thousands of videos. It was one of the early contenders for a viral video, and it is hilarious. Please check it out if you have not yet seen it. I have links below to all of Jay's information. In this episode, we talk about what it's like to discover your niche. We talk about creating a business out of something that you completely were not expecting to create from. We talk about following the magic and growing and doing something great just for the sake of doing it. Anything that is good is worth doing. Follow us today, like, subscribe, follow, stick around, and thank you again so much for joining us. And let's check in now with Jay to learn about all of his adventures in animation. Morning, Jay. Thank you so much for joining me this morning on the Artist Collective radio show. It's so fantastic to see you. I haven't seen you since well before the pandemic. I don't even remember.
It's probably even longer than that. Even longer than that. And it's great that the first time I haven't seen you since whenever. Let's say it's like 4 years. Is that even possible?
I mean,
how do you?
I think so. I think, the last year was like 2 or 3 just in one year. So I think realistically, it's easily 4 years ago.
And yet it feels like no time has passed.
And no time has passed. But that's because you're one of my oldest friends. I've known you since, I was thinking about it. I've known you since I was my daughter's age.
That's crazy. That is great. Yeah. So that would be like, what are we talking? Like 91, 92 time frame?
I think I remember it being when I was 14, which was probably 91.
Yep. Yeah. 91. Early 90s. Since the early 90s, Shoshana. Wow.
It's crazy. That's almost the 80s.
Pretty much.
We were still dressing the same as the 80s.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad that we have an opportunity to catch up and that we're going to have a record of catching up. Like we can prove that it happened.
Yes.
Exactly. We were there. There was a conversation. So I'm very thankful.
Actually being recorded. And so we will have proof and it will be available for the masses. So let's talk about how Jay Allen came into existence.
Whoa.
Tell me about.
I thought you had assured me that there would be softball questions, that we would ease right into this. None of this, I don't know if I'm comfortable with. It's fine. Let's
go hard or go home. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So you grew up in North Texas, which is where we met. And then you went off to college in Oklahoma. And
Oklahoma State.
You started off as what was your major up there?
I started as a computer science major at Oklahoma State University. I was
because you were a bit of a nerd.
Yes,
you were getting started.
Yeah, following in my dad's footsteps. That was definitely a factor. My dad's a software engineer.
Okay.
And so that was a path that made a lot of sense to me at the time. It's like, well, I like computers, so I should also learn how to tell computers what to do. That was the thinking at that time. And probably also you could get like a good job being able to tell computers what to do.
Sure. But you were also musical, right? You started playing music from a very young age.
Yes. Music has been the constant for sure.
The constant. Yeah. And so did you were you doing your own music in those early college days? Were you playing with other people when you went to college? Was computer science and music integrated for you at all? Or was that not something?
Yeah. So when I was at Oklahoma State, so I played in the marching band. So I was a percussionist in high school and then in college. So I played in the pit, like marimba, xylophone, vibes, all that stuff at Oklahoma State. And I also played piano in the jazz band there, which was something that I'd done in high school as well. So I played piano in the jazz band throughout high school. And then the jazz instructor at Oklahoma State caught wind that I could play piano, and he's like, "Hey, what do you think?" And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." So I was doing that while I was studying computer science. So I don't know how much crossover there necessarily was, but
you were still developing both sides of yourself.
Absolutely. And I think in high school band, like I don't I'm just gonna like reveal a big secret to your audience, but a lot of times the kids that are in band are nerdy and are into like math and science. No. Yeah. So this don't let that get out, but that's usually how that was. And so going into high school band or going into college band, it's just leveled up. It's like now you're really comfortable in your skin as a nerd. So it wasn't unusual. Nerdiness. Yeah, exactly. It's like you're a self-actualized nerd then. And so there were several computer science majors and engineering students and a lot of folks that were studying the same kind of stuff that I was. So we're still side by side, locking arms, playing the fight song and talking to computers.
Awesome. So tell me what changed. Where was the transition? You switched from Oklahoma State and came down to the University of North Texas and switched majors. And yeah. I will never forget, we hadn't seen each other for many, many years. I mean, and we didn't have internet back then. So we didn't keep in touch either. And I was in French class and you turned around and I'll never forget the look on your face. You're very contemplative and you're like, weren't you in French? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then it just started all over again, our friendship. So tell me what brought you down to the fold of UNT.
Yeah. So, studying computer science for my freshman and sophomore year, we got into that latter part of my sophomore year, and you just kind of start looking around at the other people in your classes that you're studying with. And a lot of the other students, I'd look at, for example, the guys in my dorm that were also computer science majors, and they were coding all the time. They were like in their spare time, they were making programs to do cool things, and they were trying to hack things, and they were, doing all these things in their dorm room and all this stuff. And I just realized that wasn't me. Like I wasn't drawn to it in that way. It wasn't like a passion for me, really. But I think more importantly than that, I think I don't really have the wiring for it. And I think getting okay with that idea was a big part of, making the decision to change. So I started looking around at like, what is my heart naturally drawn to? Like, what do I just, take all factors away, parents, expectations, the idea of making money someday, what am I naturally drawn to? And it was always music and storytelling and film and TV and, basically making audio visual things of some type. And Oklahoma State didn't really have a program for that. The closest thing they had was broadcast journalism. And so that's like, all right, well, you can write for a newspaper or be on the news. I wasn't really, interested in any of that. And University of North Texas has a fantastic radio, television, and film program. And I had a lot of friends there, and it just made a lot of sense. So I transferred to UNT in 1995. 1995. Yeah, 95, 96 year. And that's where the change began. That's where the magic really started happening.
You were actually there then before me, because I started at UT Arlington and transferred 96 to 97 year. So we just hadn't crossed paths until, I don't know when that class was. Maybe that was the fall of 96, or as soon as I got there. I don't really.
Yeah.
You started in RTVF and you found your niche. I don't even know if I knew you were studying that in college. I don't remember knowing that. Tell me how it was for your parents when you switched your major. You said that you put away all of those other expectations, which I think is really hard, and it's definitely not something I was able to do. So how did that shake out? Were your parents concerned? Did you get any pushback, or did you just embrace it and run with it?
No, and in fact, they were encouraging of it. I think that when I talk about expectations, I think these were expectations I put on myself more than, my parents saying like, you must follow this path, computer science all the way. It was just, I think when you're at that age though, you're looking for any kind of foothold. You're just like, what am I doing with my life? I feel like I should maybe go towards. And I think for my parents, it made total sense to them too, because, I was doing stuff like this as early as I can remember, like getting their cassette tape recorder out and recording little radio shows for myself and getting my friends together. Like everybody that would come over, we would like make a show apparently, and making videos in high school. And I mean, it's just something I always did. And so I'll have to ask them this, but I feel like it was probably like, oh yeah, I totally see that. So they were very supportive. Yeah.
I learned in the talk that you gave at UT Arlington. I watched that online recently that you gave last month or something, and I that's where I learned that you had been filming like your own commercials and doing your own thing. I didn't even know that about you, but you had some pictures of tiny baby Jay Allen doing these little videos up there. So were you doing stuff like that while you were in college? I know you started playing in bands when you were in Denton. Were you also doing any sort of videography or any sort of shooting or any of that stuff that I didn't know about then either? I feel like I didn't even really know you.
Yeah, I mean, there were student projects, and I don't know that I was doing a ton of video work in my spare time. Most of my spare time was playing music, and so. I did have a couple of student projects, actually one full narrative about stealing somebody's cigarettes and then chasing the thief around Denton. So it's a silent film, and it has a happy ending. Everyone learns a valuable lesson at the end. All filmed right in front of the White House, Yellow House, and the art store that was next door. So that was a student project, and then we did like the broadcasting stuff and all of that.
So then you graduated and you got a few corporate jobs. You worked at a few different corporate jobs. Now tell me where, tell me where your transition into who you are and what you do now came to be. You first recorded the fabulous Secret Powers show in 2005. Had you been working on things like that before? Was this just sort of like a fun thing that you were doing on the side? Tell me how that really came to be for you.
Yeah, I'm trying to retrace my steps a little bit. Doing videos of that sort has always been something that I was interested in. Some of the videos that you were talking about from when I was a kid, making kung fu videos and, fake commercials and just all kinds of ridiculous things that I would do with my friends whenever I would like go over to their house, or it's like, their parents had a video camera, and like, so we would spend all weekend just like making silly stuff. And so I think I always had done, something along those lines. And in college, when I look back on some of my student projects, I realize now that a lot of the things that I was drawn to in college, like the things that I just chose to do, is pretty much what I do for a living now. Like doing in these were things that were outside of the assignment. So for example, we had like I had an audio production course, and all we had to do was just record some audio that had some sound effects in there. We just had to make something, and I went all the way and recorded like a fake radio commercial for this imaginary movie and this imaginary fragrance by Calvin Klein, and basically doing exactly what I do now, like coming up with an idea, writing some copy for it, and then recording it. And my video projects were kind of the same way, where I would just sort of turn them into some kind of personal comedy project, like there's the assignment, right? But then there's the, like, you want to tell some kind of your own story or something that amuses you, right? And so I usually went for that every time. And so once I got out of school and I started, making things on the side on my own, those were still the kinds of things that I was drawn to. And so, like just kind of leading up to 2005 and, Fabulous Secret Powers and all of that, the beginnings of the internet, had really been playing out in the, 6 to 7 years leading up to that time. And so there were these new things that were just being, these new things existed, like, in a new way. So I remember seeing the first South Park short, where Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they'd like had the, construction paper cutouts, and they made this little animated short. And I thought that was so funny. People were just emailing that video around. Like, that's how we were like getting that content. Right. And, and then, years later, I had seen the G.I. Joe PSAs by Eric Fensler. And I thought that was just the funniest thing that I had ever seen. And my friend Ryan, so Ryan was a friend of mine from Oklahoma State, and we had a lot in common in terms of like comedy and just weird video things and stuff like that. So we saw these G.I. Joe PSAs, and it's like, okay, this is it. It almost felt like a calling, or it just like it was sort of like shining a light. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, you've got some work to do. Like
the challenge had been laid out, right? Like, okay,
I don't even know if it was like a challenge. It's just, well, maybe it is. It's just inspiration can be very challenging. Like, I think it was something that was so inspiring that we just had to respond to it. It just activated this part of our sense of humor and like all the things that we were into, that you just had to respond. So I mean, in that sense, I think it is a little bit of a challenge. It's like, all right, dude, like, you've been shown this amazing thing.
Yeah.
Can you make something this good? Like, do you think you can make something this funny? I don't know. I doubt it, but like, I'm going to try.
And is that where the Fabulous Secret Powers came from? Is that was your contribution in response?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the G.I. Joe PSAs was the tipping point, because, I watched a lot of Mystery Science Theater growing up, and I watched a lot of Space Ghost Coast to Coast and C Lab 2021, like all these shows that were sort of, like taking old animation or taking some kind of source material and repurposing it for something else. Mystery Science Theater taking the old movies and sort of riffing on them and making their own stories, and Space Ghost doing the same thing. And so when I saw this thing on the internet, this GI Joe thing, it's like, all right, that hit close to home, because like, oh my gosh, like I grew up watching GI Joe religiously, and so it was so personal that I think that's what it was, that was like, I have to respond to this. Like I have to participate in whatever all of this is that's happening in some way.
Yeah. So you created it in 2005, you published it in 2007, according to your talk. And you said that it was mostly just for friends and entertainment purposes, and it didn't really do anything until 2010. Did you release it with the hope of it doing anything? Did you have any sort of expectation or hope, or wouldn't it be cool if, or anything in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I mean,
was it frustrating that it didn't do anything until 2010?
I think the expectations back then, just by the timeline, had to be more modest. People weren't talking about viral videos in 2005. I mean, YouTube was just being born. And so, now the context is so much more, it's so different now, because now you have people making a living being YouTubers and Twitch streamers and having millions of subscribers and all of this. And that just wasn't a thing that existed back then. And so, I think the vision that you have in your head is, all right, you make something that you find funny, that you find amusing, and then you put it out there. And if you're lucky, other people will think it's as funny as you do, and maybe they'll share it with their friends. We had posted it to a message board called Something Awful back in the day. And that was the first place that it was public. This was pre-YouTube. And so we put it up on Something Awful, and it did pretty well there. I mean, people, at that time, they like mirrored it on their websites. Like they took the QuickTime and they put it on different servers and shared it. And, it made the rounds in the live journal community. And, it did get shared just in the way that people were sharing things at that time. And so in 2007, when we put it on YouTube, it was really just more of a formality. It's just like, well, this is where things go to live now, apparently.
Right.
And so I don't know that we put it up there with any hopes of like, oh man, this is going to be like our ticket to stardom. It's going to like take off, and, we're going to start a channel, and I'm going to be an influencer one day. Like, we weren't thinking about any of that. And, what was happening simultaneously, well, beside all of this stuff was, I was sort of figuring out who I wanted to be when I grow up. And, the He-Man video did provide a lot of opportunities, but not in the way that most people think, because when you see something on YouTube, the assumption is, well, it's the success needs to come on that medium, right? Like you put something out, it does well on YouTube, and then you become a YouTube star and you make lots of YouTube money. And that was not how things played out at all. And in my opinion, I think things played out in a much better way. And what I mean by that is, we started, getting some interest from, I don't want to say interest. It was just more like, I'm trying to think. So yeah, this was in my UTA talk, but a friend of mine, Chris Sabat, had seen the video through Matt Pearsall, right? And so Matt and Chris had been friends for a long time, and Matt had seen the He-Man. Matt was in on the He-Man video from early on. He had seen it, and I think he shared it with Chris. And Chris had never met me before, but it was just like he went to UNT. It was amazing that I'd never met Chris before. I'll put it that way. You're just one of those like Denton people that's like, how have we not crossed paths? So anyway, he saw the He-Man video, and he's a voice actor, and so he Matt called me up, and Chris took the phone from him, is like, hey dude, what's your story, who are you, I love this video, let's just talk about stuff. And so we just kind of became friends through that. And so my first paid game trailer gig came directly from Chris Sabat. And he has a voice studio called Okratron 5000. And so Okratron, they do a lot of video game work, and Chris personally does a lot of, he's the voice of Vegeta and does a lot of stuff, but he also does a lot of video game work. And so one of his clients, Square Enix, had sent him a request. Hey, we know that you usually do voice over work for us, but do you guys ever do video work, game trailer stuff? And it was one of those moments where he was just like, yes we do. And then he hey Jay, can you help with this video thing, you're into that? And so got that call, and so me and Ryan jumped in and just made the best game trailer that we could. And then Square Enix sent Chris another request, and he sent the trailer to us, and we made the trailer, and they loved it, and things just kept going. And then eventually he just more or less handed the reins to us. And that's kind of how Secret Powers got its start.
So did you start Secret Powers before that first video game trailer was created, or did it kind of come because you were getting so much repeat customers that you just said, okay, we have to make this an actual thing?
It became a real thing when we got a call from a game developer in Chicago called Wide Load Games. And they had, I think it was, they had seen the He-Man video, and long story short, hey, we thought that was funny. Can you make some funny fake commercials for this game that we're working on? And the opportunity was, all right, this is going to be a 5 to 6 month contract. I think we made 20 or 30 fake commercials, and 50, I think it was 50 videos total. It was a good amount of content. It was going to take us 5 to 6 months to create. And so it was a situation where, well, I guess the decision that was in front of me was, okay, so you're going to have your expenses taken care of for 5 to 6 months. So I had, meanwhile, I had this job at Club Corp where I was working, in an in-house position. And so it was kind of all right, I could make a jump to doing my own thing, and just if I don't figure it out in 5 to 6 months, then I don't figure it out. Then I come back to the corporate world. I don't know, but it seemed really clear to me that this was sort of a junction point where I had a choice to make, and I chose to do my own thing and make the fake commercials and keep doing game trailers, and that's kind of how that started.
I kind of vaguely remember having conversations with you, probably over Instant Messenger, about when you were wrestling with the idea of, should I stay or should I go? Is this worth jumping in, because there's no safety net? And I'm always like, just what? Life's too short. It's corporate. You can get a corporate job at any time. You got to strike while the iron's hot. So I've always kind of been like that. So I hope that I prodded you that direction. But
there were several voices in my life at that time encouraging me, and I really needed that, because I was very fearful.
Scary about it. Scary.
And so you were definitely somebody who encouraged me in that. There were many times when Chris Sabat talked me down from the ledge as well, where, and I was already in it by then, and it was just I just don't know if I can do this. And, and he's like, man, you've got this. Just like,
Yeah.
just do it. Like it's gonna be fine.
Because
And
you were married by this point. Is that right?
yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
there's all these things that go along with that, I think, because you're not just winging it by yourself. Like, you're responsible to another person for, a home and all this kind of stuff. So
Exactly. And, at that time, Amy was very encouraging as well. Like,
yeah.
none of this would have happened without Amy.
Yeah.
She was the primary investor in this whole operation,
Yeah.
especially in those early days, because, she, as soon as I started at that time, it was called SLACKCiRCUS. So that was the name of my YouTube channel, but we kept that
Mhm.
name and ran under that banner. And so when I started doing SLACKCiRCUS full time, Amy's company, she was a client manager for a
Mm.
successful company. So she was providing the health benefits and the income when there were down months, and there were down
Yeah.
months. And so, that conversation, when everything was starting, you know, um, she was the voice saying, like, yes, you've got this. Yes, I believe in you. And also, like, I have your back. And also, there is kind of this safety net here.
Yeah.
So don't worry. Like, everyone was saying, like, man, you need to do this. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I probably was the last to believe that,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And she even made an appearance in the Fabulous Secret Powers, right? Her
She
voice.
did. She's the voice of the sorceress in
Yeah.
that. So when we
Yeah,
get
I
to
just
the
watched it.
Melissa Manchester section, that's her. Yeah.
I just watched it the other day and I was like, wait a minute. I recognize that
Know
voice.
that
And I don't know
voice.
if I might have known before, but so I think it's interesting. One thing I'm noticing is the irony between, you were thinking about what you wanted to do when you grew up, and it turned into creating fake commercials and video game trailers and all of these really fun sort of uh, endeavors that you really have to have a childlike mind, I think, in order to really do it well. So
Mhm.
a lot of your work is very gleefully childlike. That's why it really speaks to a lot of the kids. When the kids today see it, they're like, this is amazing, because it really speaks that language. And I also notice in a lot of what you do, there's a lot of improv. It seems like you're really kind of just trusting the creative process and coming up with things. And you probably write it down. Tell me about that process. Do you start with the animation and then do the music? Do you do the music and then the animation? How much of it is just like, let's see what this sounds like, and then sort of tell me about your working process?
Yeah. For me, it almost always starts with music.
Yeah.
If I can hear it, I can see it.
Hmm.
And, being in my industry, or the industry that I'm in now, um, that's backwards than what it is for a lot of people. A lot of people, like, they see the pictures first and they sketch it
Mm-hmm.
out and they, like,
Mm-hmm.
draw this sequence. And for me, if I can hear it, a lot of times on projects that I work on, I will finish almost a complete sound layer, like almost like it's a radio play. Like, here's the whole
Hmm.
thing, and then make pictures to that. Like that, in a lot of
Interesting.
projects, like, you would never want to do that, and that's backwards. But in the case of Fabulous Secret Powers, that's 100% what it was. I recorded this song, performed this song. So I made the instruments all the instrumentation, the arrangement for the song. And then one weekend I went up to Tulsa and went up to Ryan's studio and recorded all the vocals. And then we went straight from recording those vocals into starting to animate it.
Hmm.
And so we had, basically a finished audio track to work from.
Oh.
And then animated to that. And then there were some voices that were put in after the fact. So like, I think Skeletor was done, like Skeletor and Beastman were done sometime later, like in post. But yeah, usually it starts with the audio part for me. And then it's kind of like figuring out how to express those sounds visually.
It's interesting, because what you do is such a visual medium, but you can't really do it without the auditory side of it either. Like they are very linked.
Yeah, there's always a push and pull.
Yeah.
I think when we work on something that, let's say, is an animated piece, it's like a motion graphics piece. It starts in storyboards, and one frame at a time. Like we go from here to here to here, and it's visual storytelling. Or you'll start with a script, and then you go into storyboards, and then you start putting sound in all of that. So most of our client work, that's exactly how things are working, like kind of in the traditional way. But for my personal projects, it's I think there's always going to be some kind of musical element to what I do, just because that's what I know, and that's what, I don't know, musical humor is always the funniest thing to me. Like I just think it's possible to reach this level of humor that's, I don't think, is quite possible with just the spoken word. So I think I'm always going to gravitate towards that.
I want to switch directions a little bit and talk about some philosophies of yours that I saw in your talk. You had a few slideshows up, and I think for this audience that I'm reaching out to of creatives, being a creative and an artist can be difficult. I think that you have tapped into this magic area where you're able to make a living from your creative arts. And that's not always something it's not easy to do, and it's not something that comes to everybody. There's many of us who work for a long time and don't get to that place. But you always have something else going on too. So the three, is it 1, 2, 3? There are 4. There are 4 things that slides that you had that I thought were really interesting quotes that I would like you to expand on, if you will. One is, creating something good is always worth it. You are not alone. Perfectionism kills creativity. And knowing when to embalm the leprechaun.
Thanks to Echo Lab. Yes.
So let's start with creating something is always worth it. Tell me a little bit more about your thinking behind that.
Yeah, that is a slide that we've had in our capabilities presentation for Secret Powers for many years. And we start there because I think it's important. I want, anybody that we're talking to and thinking about working with, knowing our point of view and why we do the things that we do. And creating something good is always worth it, is just something that I personally believe. Like if you're going to decide I'm going to make something, then make it something, like don't half-ass it, like make it good. And the underlying layer to all of that is, don't just think about the success that you might get from it. Don't think about the end result. Think about the process. The process in itself is a reward. So in setting out to just create something good that you think is good, that you think is cool, that you think is funny, going through that process with honesty and vulnerability, you're going to get something out of it guaranteed. It may not be like a stack of money, or adoration from screaming fans or whatever. You're going to grow in some way, and hopefully you're going to connect with somebody. Like somebody is going to find meaning in that. You're going to be able to connect with them. And I just think that good attracts good. And that is why I think it's worth it. You know, if you have decided that it's something that is worth pursuing, then it's probably worth pursuing, and you should see where that leads. And sometimes it doesn't lead to where you think it will. And in fact, it usually doesn't. And I think that's what's really cool and exciting about it.
Which also, so the connection part kind of lends itself to the next thing, which is you are not alone. You mentioned in your talk about how you put yourself out there and then started suddenly seeing all these other people that were like-minded. I think as creatives, we tend to be a little bit more sensitive to the world at large. And sometimes we can close in on ourselves and feel like we're all alone in this world. And I think that creating actually, like you said, makes us less alone. It builds that community. And I think, so tell me a little bit more about that from your perspective. Because I could, I mean, I could talk, but you know,
I would love to. And before I do, I have a question. Do you hear leaf blowers right now?
No.
Okay, fantastic. They're right out there. I'm happy that the cone is small enough that you don't hear that.
I hear my fan, but I don't hear your leaf blowers.
Okay, fantastic.
I mean, this is just this is a working world that we're in. So it's,
that's right. That's right. We're going to have cats. We're going to have babies. If COVID has taught us anything, you know, we need to just live in the place where we live. So I agree that although a lot of times creating something can be a solitary activity, it definitely creates all of these paths that you probably didn't think of when you set out to make something. And that's what I think is really powerful about setting out to do anything, like setting out to do anything that didn't exist before, is the power of that act to connect with other people. Because, you know, you're putting some of yourself out there. It takes some amount of vulnerability to do that. And that's what we all want. Like, we all want to see ourselves reflected in other people. We all want to understand that, you know, some days I feel a little broken, and this person over here is saying like, hey, I feel broken some days too. And it's a very human, very real, and very kind of spiritual connection to just realize that in that moment. And when it comes out of, you know, art or music or writing or, you know, creativity in business, that's a really cool thing that we should pay attention to. And I personally want more of that. I want that. I want to learn more about people and understand people better and understand myself better. And I mean, that's where the process comes in. And so, you know, when I'm saying that you're not alone, you know, at least in that talk, that's something that I really wish that I had heard more when I was starting out in school, because like, you're studying alone every day, you know, you're in class with other people, but you know, the way that you perform in school, like it can feel isolating, you know?
Yes, sure.
And like, I am alone. Like, I just got to this school and I know, I don't know anybody here, you know? And I think particularly when you're in a creative field, you know, there's this image of the, you know, the suffering artist, you know, that spends 5 months in a cabin, you know, and is like suffering through their art and all of that. And that's the way that it's supposed to be. I think that, that can be valuable sometimes if you need to concentrate or what, sometimes you need the quiet, and that's valuable too.
Yeah.
But I think that that when you think about, though, on the other side of that, it's an opportunity to like create a kind of spiritual handshake moment. I think that's worth keeping in mind throughout, because yeah.
That's great. Perfectionism kills creativity. I hear this a lot. Tell me about your experience with that.
Well, yeah. So, I put that in there, and I like talking about that because that is a reminder that I need every day.
Yeah.
It's easy to get into something or start creating something and critique it as it's being creative, and that's extremely counterproductive. And I don't remember who it was that said this, but it was just sort of an idea that it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, in that creation and critique are two separate processes. And so keep them separate. That you would be wise to keep them separate. So make the thing, create the thing honestly, and without judgment. Just let it be the thing that it's going to be. And then, is it good? Ask those questions. How could it be better? Critique is healthy, but I have a long history of ideas not ever even getting off the ground because there's a voice that says, oh, that's not going to work because this. Oh, people aren't going to like that because this. Oh, that's already been done 1,000 times, so it's not worth doing. And those things may be true, but let's save that until you've gotten somewhere, like just explore a little bit. And so like I do need to hear that. I mean, even now in my professional life, I wrestle with that. I think most people that I know that are, trying to do anything creative have a sense of imposter syndrome, and, can be the most talented people that I've ever met. And they'll say, you know what, like, I feel like a fraud more than half the time. And so I think it takes hard work not to let perfectionism get in the way of the thing that you're trying to make. And, perfectionism ultimately, I think is kind of a prideful thing, right? I think, creating something good does take humility. Like you have to be okay with maybe people not liking the thing that you're doing. And so if you have this voice that's saying from the start, like, well, people are going to hate this, so I'm not going to do it. Well, you're probably nothing's going to get made. Like nothing new is going to go out into the world if that voice is winning every argument.
And also then the people that need to receive whatever you have to offer won't be able to receive it because you're not putting it out there. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the artist and the observer or of the art. So like we need each other to not have that perfectionism or that I'm not good enough or I'm just gonna nip it in the bud. We like there are things that anybody can be reached in any way. So even if it's one person as opposed to like 25 people, that one person might be the one person that really, really needs whatever it is that you're producing, whether it's, to laugh hysterically at something, ridiculous, like He-Man singing songs or, whatever.
Exactly. And it's like, and you raise a really good point about, the symbiosis of all of that, and the giving and receiving of it. I mean, because that's like what we're talking about is relationship, right? There's a relationship between, those two things, or those two people. And for a relationship to work, there has to be honesty, there has to be transparency. And people can tell when you're not being honest with the thing that you're making. People can tell when you're not being honest with your art. And people can also feel when you are being honest, and when you're being truthful on your better days, and you're just making something without an agenda, just like, this is something that is inside of me that needs to come out. And I think that's a good foundation for a relationship. It's like, all right, this is what it is. This is, who I am, or this is, my point of view. And also it kind of begs the question, it's like, am I alone in this? Like, do you feel this? Do you see this too? Do you feel this too? Then you started a conversation, right? And that's really cool, because then a conversation can go anywhere. It's like, it starts off with like a topic, or it starts off with a question, but then the conversation that happens after that, I think, is where the really good stuff is. So that just goes back to the first thing. It's like, that's the why. That's why it's worth it, is, everything that
I do
happens
hear
afterwards. That's an F-16.
Oh.
So we live near an Air Force base. And so some days there's drills all day long. It's just
that makes sense why it's a little louder than a leaf blower too.
It is. Like, there's some days where there's just like afterburners pointing right at my window right there. So
that helps creativity. I love all of that you said. Tell me about this last one. How do you know when to embalm the leprechaun? And what in the heck? What does that actually mean? Where does that come from?
Well, so this was
what happened to the leprechaun? Why does it need
you'll have to
embalming
remind
in the first
me,
place?
like, okay, so the quote is, it's okay. We need to ask Matt Barnhart or Matt Pence about this.
Okay.
Well, the exact quote, they might even have a picture of like the piece of paper that's in the studio. So I want to make sure that I'm attributing and quoting.
It came from that. That's right. Okay.
It came from Ecolab, right? But I believe it's okay to chase the unicorn, but know when it's time to embalm the leprechaun.
That's it.
And so what I imagine, the scenario that I imagine, and I now I think I'm gonna have to send Matt Barnhart a message about this, but the way I imagine that list and that point on the list being created is, you've got a studio engineer recording a band, and the band is chasing something like, all right, I just had this idea, guys. Like, what if we did this, and the bass line would do, whatever. Yeah. And so they're exploring, and the engineer's recording all of it, and they're getting all of it, and they're chasing this thing. But there comes a time when it's like, okay, guys, we've gone all the way to the mountaintop. I think that this idea has played itself out. And so, like, how I make sense of all of that is, you chase, if you're chasing a unicorn, like, there's probably a rainbow involved. So if you've chased the unicorn, then you're probably also going to find the rainbow. If you follow the rainbow all the way to the end, what's at the end of a rainbow? A pot of gold. What's probably near the pot of gold is the leprechaun, of course. And so this is like, you've beat the dead horse for such a long time that, like, the leprechaun's not even alive anymore. Like, he's like died from old age. And so he's just a corpse on the ground. Guys, it's really like, this is past its expiration date. We tried it. You gave it your all, but it's not going to happen. Time to embalm the leprechaun. But again, I do need Matt Barnhart to verify if my interpretation of this particular studio rule is correct. I mean, Matt, I look forward to your guidance.
It sounds like when you put it in the full context, which I did not, I just stole the part that I thought was the most interesting. That totally makes sense. You're chasing after the magic, know when to put the magic down into history, into posterity, know when to, like, wrap it up and make it stick.
Exactly.
So, which I think is an important part. It's in improv, it's knowing when to end the scene, right? It's knowing when to shoot across the stage and say, end scene. This, you end on the high note, you end on the which I think is important. It's an important part of the process too, knowing when to lay it down and walk away and move on. And on that note, that's that's all the questions I have.
All right.
Anything that you want to talk about that we didn't? Any thing you want to add?
Well, there is something I want to ask. So I'm really
okay.
interested in what's the origin point of this show? Like, what was the spark or the thing that happened where you decided, you know what, I'm going to do this interview series with other artists and make some just really compelling points about creativity and making stuff. Like, tell me about how that came about.
Well, thank you for asking. I guess so. My background is journalism. I used to write business profiles, and I always I have a plethora of artistic friends, and there were just questions that I often wanted to ask, contemplating for my own life, but also just in general, that didn't necessarily come up in everyday conversation. And then the pandemic happened, and I was just kind of like, I would like to figure out some way to ask these questions. I had a couple in particular that I was like, I'm really curious about this particular element and how it feeds into their art. How does that influence what they do and put out? But it never, like, it's not like a question you just would email. And it's not a question that if you're in person, it would just kind of come up. So I just kind of, I think I was brainstorming one day and I just kind of wrote stuff down in a journal. And then I was talking to a couple of my girlfriends about, things that we always kind of like to do. Oh, I think my husband discovered this podcast app that made podcasting pretty easy. And so he recorded a little thing and then thought it was funny and sent it to me, and I sent it to my friends and was like, we're going to start this podcast. And my friend was like, yes, I've always wanted to do that. Here's all my ideas. And I was like, oh, here's some of my ideas. And then it just kind of never went anywhere. And then she does all kinds of other art. And she was like, she and a couple of other friends were going to do a pop-up shop to sell some of the stuff. And she's like, do you want to interview us for this? So I'd already told her that I'd been interested in interviewing people. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Actually, I do want to do that.
Yeah.
So it just kind of happened. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that was so fun. I know all these other people that I haven't talked to in 2 years because of the pandemic, and I want to pick their brains. And I've long been, the artist gene is strong in my family, but it was much more directed towards one of us and not the other.
What are you talking about?
And so I often wrestled with the practicalities of life more than the artistic part. There was always this, it was just always a challenge for me to try to balance those two things. Yeah. And so I just became really curious about how other people did it and how they worked through some of those issues with that.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's important to make other artists not feel alone and to feel like they have other people that struggle with some of these same things. And
I relate strongly to what you're saying, in that I also, I mentioned the fear of just starting my own thing, and in the practical has always been something that I think created a lot of apprehension to like doing a lot of things. I think it kept me from doing lots of things, that and perfectionism, honestly. And I think that comes out of just, it's sort of like, well, I don't know, you get into all of these what ifs, like that's the practicality part, right? And so I think one thing that's been a real blessing over the years, and especially over like the last 20 years, is that you know, I've taken some chances, like not big chance, but I've taken some chances and have sort of been reassured that everything's okay. I didn't die. Like I'm still like paying my bills and all that stuff, like all of the things, like the practical concerns that you worry about, turns out didn't need to worry about them, and things were fine. And so I think it's good. Like I think it's awesome that you decided, I'm going to make this thing because I'm curious. Like that's just the best posture to enter into anything. Like I want to know more about this. It's like, you know, that there was that quote that's that, you know, interesting people are interested people, you know, you're just like, I'm interested in something, so I'm going to chase this thing. That's just like, that's a very pure activity, and, you know, way to go. It's awesome. Love it.
Thank you. I also think that I like to tell people stories, and I really enjoyed that aspect of interviewing business people. And I don't see that happening a lot to artists. I think musicians and writers will often tell their own stories through their words. But multimedia artists, they have a harder time talking about themselves and their process. But I still think it's an important story to tell, because it's a very important perspective for the world, is how the artist thinks and sees things.
Well, absolutely. And two, like creativity in business, you know, I think, you know, the term creativity automatically gets applied to these specific and really confining things. It's like, oh yeah, you need to be making a song, or you need to be making a painting, or you need to be doing a comedy show. Like those are creative things, graphic design, you know, the creative stuff. But it's easy to forget that like something that is amazing and it seems like genius level to me every time I'm around it are people who are creative business people or creative entrepreneurs, like that have a business idea and see an opportunity or see a need in the marketplace, and then can form a plan, like a business plan around an idea. Like that's Rain Man stuff to me. Like I do not understand it.
100%.
And there's so much magic in that. And that's something I'm continually interested in, are people that are like, you know, finding an opportunity, or you know, find angle's not the right word. I'm just saying, like, there's identifying a need that so there's something that people will benefit from, and saying, oh man, here's how we could turn that into a business, and here's what our costs are going to be, and here's what the margin's going to be, and here's how we're going to market it. And now I'm going to go on Shark Tank, and I'm, you know, going to do this thing. Like I really can't imagine myself doing that, if I'm honest, because my brain, I don't have that wiring. And it's like, it's the same way, like one of those people doesn't have musical wiring, you know, and like what I do seems like voodoo to them. So I think there's always a lot to learn from each other.
Absolutely. And I think that also applies to parenting too. I think there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of creative problem solving in parenting. I think you have to have that, because every day there's something new thrown at you, and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't in my toolkit. I don't know how to deal with this. And that's
improv. Like you're basically making jazz.
Right. And I was going to say that my favorite form of improv is conversation. You mentioned that earlier. Like you ask a question, you take a conversation, and you go with it, and that's where the magic happens. And my favorite form of improv is conversation, because that's what all conversations are. They're just making stuff up as you go along, and following the funny and following the things that are interesting. So
yeah.
Well, this has been a very interesting trip in and of itself.
It has.
Thank you so much for taking the time to tell your story and talk about all the different things. It's been so great to catch up and see you. And I'm I don't know if it's weird to say, but I'm super proud of you. I'm super proud of
Oh,
you for
I'm proud of
following your
you.
dreams and for pursuing it and doing it with such excellence and doing such a great job and making the world better because you're entertaining us, you know, and helping us to step away from the heaviness of the world, because there's a lot of that.
There
And
is.
you've done it so well, and you're growing. Your business is growing, and you're thriving, and things are good. And I'm so glad to know you, and so glad to
I'm glad to know
watch
you too.
this journey for you.
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, that first of all, thank you. That is just so kind and sweet of you to say. And it means an extra lot coming from someone who's known me since 1991.
I know.
Like when I was 15 or 16, like that's warts and all kind of territory.
It's tiny little baby things.
Tiny babies.
Tiny babies.
So I appreciate it, man. This has been fun. I'm really glad that you invited me, and gosh, this is just the best. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for joining us today on the Artist Collective Radio Show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow. I'll have some of Jay's links too, so you can check him out and follow all of his SLACKCiRCUS.
Is that what you do?
Stuff.
Is that what, like, I see it's always like mash this and down here and description.
I don't know, hit the button, ring the bell. I don't really know what any of that is, but do all of that. Things. If you know what that is, please do that for us. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Artist Collective Radio Show.
Thank you. See ya.